had it for 15, 20 years and they kind of want a bit of a break. Round about their 30s, they start to get interested again. And particularly if they come back to education in a way that's done in a positive way and where they're being treated as an adult, they really embrace it. It also takes them through various life and career changes. And then we see a massive renaissance in people as they come towards retirement or they go into retirement wanting to have a productive later life and contribute to their society. So when governments announced £400 million a couple of weeks ago, it was interesting. That was just for further education, the 19 to 24. Adult education didn't get a single extra penny. In fact, FE generally has been neglected for the last 10 years, but actually the real Cinderella of the Cinderellas is adult education. And I suppose I have questions around how society is going to adapt. So the idea that I'm going to work for 50 years without top-ups of education, that doesn't seem great at the moment. But if you look at the acceleration in change in the nature of work, artificial intelligence, the way that whole sectors, remember travel agents? There used to be lots of travel agents. There are now very few travel agents. That nature of that job was changed by technology. Well, you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of changes in technology. In the decade that we're going into, 900,000 people will lose their jobs in retail alone through automation. Remember those nice people who are cashiers? Remember those bloody machines now that you can't get to work and they have to have somebody to come over to help? One day they'll work properly, and therefore the little person that you're actually talking to help you use the machine that's meant to help you will be redundant. 900,000 of those jobs will go away. That's retail. Safe professions like law, accountancy, the whole audit profession are going to have radical changes in the next decade. The whole principle of hierarchy, that you go and do your basic audit, you go and do your basic accountancy, there's lots of people at the moment, and you gradually work your way up to partner, and then you make lots of money and retire at 55. That whole business model is going to go puff. It's going to disappear. So that's just two sectors. There's virtually every sector in the next decade is going to have a radical overhaul. So if you're 42 years old, you've got a mortgage, you've got kids, and your profession disappears or your job disappears, where do you go for education now? Actually, you can't afford to go to university. Am I really going to take 3 years out, take out £30,000 of additional debt because I've already got the mortgage? No, that doesn't work. Am I going to go back to regular college? Am I going to sit with 19-year-olds? Doesn't really fit very well for me. That's a huge problem. And not having a place in society where people can retrain, where people can re-educate and repurpose themselves is absolutely criminal. The other piece, which is where, and I've for 8.5 years in my job, I've had, yeah, but you're basket weaving for old people, aren't you, really? That's what adult education's about. And by the way, basket weaving for old people, I'll fight you to the death about it. Hugely, hugely positive in so many ways, and by the way, can be a career as well. But actually, if you look at longevity, health, the changes that people have at their later years can be hugely aided by being involved in education. The last dinner I had with Vince Cable when he was Secretary of State, it was a bunch of principals who came together, and Vince held court. And I said at that point, I said, Vince, do you realise how much you subsidise David Hunt's National Health Service budget by, for every £1 that you put into adult education for our older citizens, you probably save £5 to £10 in A&E, dementia wards, social care. And he goes, of course I do. And I said, does David Hunt know that? He goes, of course he doesn't. So that's really what you're seeing, the whole range of adult education, whether it's retraining or whether it's later life, it has a huge positive nature of underpinning society when all of these changes are taking place. That's for the mainstream of us. That's the majority of us fit and healthy. But also, I'd just like to make a really big point around those less advantaged in society. So, my college, as well as dealing with lots of able-bodied people who are well-educated and prosper, we also are Britain's leading deaf education college. We're 100 years old this year. One of the first courses we ran in 1919 were for soldiers who came back from the First World War who'd been deafened by shell fire. And we've taken that, and deaf education has been a core to what we've done. We have adults with severe learning difficulties coming to us every week for education and support. We have a speciality in adult stammering. Each one of those groups is massively marginalised in society and in employment. It's kind of fairly obvious that, oh, well, you know, yeah, but Sainsbury's does a really good job with learning disabilities people and they stack shelves. Yeah, good for Sainsbury's. However, there are a lot of adults with learning disabilities who could work, who never get those opportunities. If you think about it, 65% of adults with learning disabilities want a job. They want the independence, they want the money, they want the community, they want the society, and they want the self-respect. And do you know what the statistic is? Of the adults with learning disabilities who could work, that do, 6%. Down from 7% 5 years ago. For people who have stammers, quite a lot of them have work. However, do they go for promotions? Because our whole society is geared around the interview, which kind of self-selects for a lot of people. So each of those groups needs support in some way, particularly around getting into employment. Now for me, we kind of forget about that. And it's very easy to forget about those groups. And by the way, it's very easy to forget about anybody who's over 55 and how productive they can be in the workforce and in society as a whole. So for me, I would like to finish, I think I'm at my 10 minutes, to say that everything these guys will say is hugely important about education. The 19 to 24-year-olds are hugely important to our society and our economy, but also are the 24 to dead-year-olds. If it wasn't for them, most things wouldn't work. And actually, we should be investing in all aspects of adult education going forward. And actually, the Lib Dems need to be making a little bit more of an effort to include that in the overall platform and policy. So that's my little cri de coeur, and thank you.
Thank you. Well, that is advice that we will take to heart. Julian.
Introduce myself. I'm Julian Gravatt from the Association of Colleges. I'm sorry if any of you came here wanting to see my boss David Hughes, but he's not very well, so I'm covering for him today. My job normally is to deal with the minutiae of regulations and funding and all the rest as it affects colleges, and so it's quite good to come out and discuss some of the bigger picture and issues, because whereas as a society we've got some really big challenges, and it's quite easy to get quite depressed about it. And Mark's listed a few of them, hasn't he? The sort of issues about the kind of fact that the successes of sort of medicine and health and all the rest means that there's more of an older population, and how does that cause changes to, and what changes are just relating to automation. I started my job as a junior auditor, and I guess if I did now, I'd be out of a job in a few years' time. There's the fact that it's 10 years since we last had a recession, and I guess we're due one, regardless of what this government does. It might be what Donald Trump and the Chinese do, and or just the normal sort of business cycle. So we have the issue that we've got quite used to the fact that employment is high and unemployment is low, and so therefore that we can worry about other things, whereas actually, so we have these challenges. We also have an issue that as a society we've got quite used in recent years to the fact that people will, that effectively employers don't need to train because they can bring people in from other countries, and they can, there's certain sectors very dependent on migration, and regardless of what the Home Office does, the there'll be people all over the world thinking, do we really want to come to the UK in its current state? So there's all sorts of challenges, there's all sorts of long-term trends and issues, aside from the fact that we're only 7 weeks from the Brexit day. And then looking at the education system, Mark's analysis is very right. We've got an education system that's very focused on the young and on people who are sort of young adults, and there are loads of challenges. The system is under real pressure, it's under real strain, and I think yeah, to be positive about what the current government is, and I can't think of many positive things. The fact that they're matching or following on from Lib Dem policies in terms of putting more money into schools is great. And so in a sense, the fact we've got a cross-party consensus between Conservatives, the Labour and Lib Dems about putting more money in education is great. The only problem is, I guess, with the Conservatives, it's a bit like the barman's offering lots of free drinks, but he's got no idea whether he's actually going to be around to actually pay for them when you actually come and cash them in next April. But it epitomises the fact that there's some real big challenges in terms of the younger part of the education system, which I don't think we can avoid doing. We can't have a situation where we don't deal with the issues in schools or the issues in sixth forms and colleges, and then only focus on. We've got to effectively deal with both, and it is a situation which is a system that's under a lot of strain. One thing I'll say, I don't recognise anybody particularly here, but I'm dealing with the challenges back, but I do deal with, on a daily basis, with colleges who are dealing with very difficult challenges in terms of the issues they've got to deal with college leaders in terms of the sector being underfunded, over-regulated, undervalued, pushed to deal with short-term decisions. If you've got issues or concerns about what particular colleges are doing in your area, do ask in a way. I mean, it'd be good to have a debate about what it is that sometimes is driving the things that we've got, because we've got a system at the moment that is under in incredible strain. So faced with these great challenges, I think sometimes there's a temptation to think, well, actually nothing can be done. But actually, I think party conferences, from what I can see from the outside, are a good opportunity to say, well, what can be done to move things forward? And so to be optimistic about this, I think that the motion that you're discussing tomorrow, which is on further education and lifelong learning, is a positive first step, and it's a good step. I think there's some good things in there. If you're looking at the three areas which I deal with in my in my world, it seems like the people who've worked on that have identified the issues and are coming with proposals. So on the 16 to 18 space, where we have a situation where every part of the education system feels neglected, but it's been undervalued compared to what happens pre-16. The proposal that there is action taken in terms of increasing the funding so that young people are no longer just doing 3 days a week, they might actually be able to do more. There's more money put in through a post-16 premium, makes a lot of sense to me. Tackling the resit policy, tackling the pay disparities between colleges and schools, all very sensible stuff, so I think that's a good tick. The second area, the apprenticeship reform. I've got some hesitations about some of the proposals that are in there. I mean, Mark's going to talk about that in more detail, so I won't say much about it. The challenge we have on apprenticeships is that we have a system that, again, has got many successes, but apprenticeships are now much better understood, and there's lots of employers are looking at ways to use apprenticeships to sort of motivate their staff, and even the Treasury has got 70 economist degree apprentices who are starting this week, which is fantastic news in many ways, that they're using apprentices to train their staff. But then you just pause a bit, I did sums, the Treasury's degree apprentices are going to cost about $750,000 a year, which is money that previously they were spending themselves, I presume, with training, and now they're getting the apprenticeship levy to pay it. And we've got a system that is gradually going bust, or quite quickly going bust, and so the colleges are in a position where the money available for small companies and also the numbers of 16 to 18-year-olds are both lower than they were, and there's no room for growth. And so the apprenticeship system is under real strain, and so I think somebody's going to need to put take some action to bring in the spending controls or a higher levy or something. There's all sorts of proposals that are around. So it's just a caution about thinking that the levy can then be used for a wider range of things, because it's not enough to deal with a system that's there already. So then finally, the proposal that launched the media yesterday, PISAs, I think they're great. I think we've spent 18 years in our sector being afraid of individual learning accounts because of a mess that was made by officials and Capita about 18 years ago. And I think that there were mistakes made and there are risks involved in doing things, but there's some sense in having a policy proposal that looks at how to deal with some of those big challenges that Mark mentions, that builds on work that's going on in Singapore and France, that develops something that says to people at different stages of their lives, look, you need to think about what it is that what you need for your 80, 90, 100-year life. I think there are some big challenges in it. I think it's not just about the mechanics of the accounts. There were some pilots a few years done on what I think were called mid-career MOTs, midlife MOTs, which was borrowed from the health service, the sort of midlife health thing, the sort of pulse of careers thing. As I said, the college system is under a lot of strain. If we had a city lit in every big city in England, we'd be in a much better place than we are. And we are where we are. I mean, City Lit's a fantastic institution. It's where I worked myself for a couple of years, a few years ago, and it's grown and developed much more from there. But it isn't just something about a government on new accounts and assuming that the sort of supply side, the provider side, the college side can automatically switch on in terms of restoring things. And so that will just need to be worked through. There's issues about the sort of mechanics and the administration and the capacity of, I don't know, the student loan company to manage accounts. But these things are solvable. I'm quite optimistic about government IT. I think I'm a bit rare in this world. I find the government IT is better than it used to be, but there's still things that sometimes don't work. So, but I think, but in a sense, I think there's a second order problems. You're in a process as a party of putting a manifesto together, and I think it's fantastic that you're in this area, and I think it's fantastic that you've got some optimistic proposals about dealing with some big challenges. So it'd be great to have a discussion and
Thank you, Julian. Well, the name of the game for the last few years in terms of adult education has been apprenticeships. And Mark Dorr from the Association for Employment and Learning Providers is going to be, I think, talking to us about the background on apprenticeships, and for that matter, I think a little bit about our own proposals.
Yeah, and I'm going to roam around a bit. I did my notes on the train on the laptop, and it's a long way down, so you're going to have to excuse me if I keep looking down and flicking through. The title I was given originally is Lifelong Learning and the Skills Gap, and I think there is a gap and there are gaps. So not only have we got a skills need, and if you look at level 2 care workers, we're short of those, we're short of technicians, level 5, English and maths in our community, real problems, construction trades, massive issues, especially if we start losing foreign workers. And actually, I was in Russia a few weeks ago for the World Skills Competition, 70-odd countries competing there. Across the globe, actually human capital has started to become, it's not finance, it's the human capital and skills. So we're not alone, but it is a real challenge. Like Julian, I think I've been in FE for 27 years, which is really scary. I've been a college principal, I've worked in the department, I ran an exam board, OCR, for a while, and now I'm representing independent training providers. I'm also a chartered accountant, weirdly. And I looked at that career going up to a partner at 55, and although it looked quite lucrative, it looks as boring as hell. So here I am talking to you today, and I'm so glad I made that decision. Association of Employment Learning Providers, I suppose we focus on work-based, community-based learning, so sort of almost out of the classroom. And our members do sort of full-time study programs, but the real strength and our real focus is around that work-based and community-based stuff. Predominantly independent training providers. Private providers gives you a feeling they're all sort of money-grabbing organisations, but actually a vast majority are not-for-profit charities. There's some manager-owned and then there's some privately owned organisations as well. So a whole range. We also have colleges, universities, endpoint assessment organisations, employer providers, because actually this work-based learning approach has opened up who offers it across a whole range of organisations. And I suppose at the moment it does feel like, as you said, apprenticeships are us.
Yeah.
So the apprenticeship policy is incredible. Right, it is a game changer. It has been massive, and we always must start with it has been fantastic. Who would have thought that a Tory government would levy businesses? You know, and it has made a massive difference in the levy world. I think the participation of levy-paying companies, there's about 20,000 of them, has gone up from 15% to 85% in terms of having apprentices. That's an amazing change. We're starting to see, there was a research report out this week, 59% of parents say they think that there are alternative options to university that would be better in terms of gaining a job and progressing in a job. That's a massive shift, and parents are talking about apprenticeships more than they ever have done before. The OECD this week said our graduates are one of the most expensive countries to graduate in, with the least return across developed countries. So there's something a bit wrong with our higher education system at the moment, and actually degree apprenticeships as part of the apprenticeship thing is making a massive change. And people worry about parity of esteem for vocational learning. I would argue that I used to say we're starting to hear people say, unfortunately I didn't go on to my degree apprenticeship approach, so I've got to go to university instead. The shift is happening. So what I'm going to cover apprenticeships and a few other things, but apprenticeships in particular, to me, is the best form of learning.